So we have an idea to change a little bit the subject from the Ottomans, but I will find a connection actually in the end. Of the St. George, the most popular military saint in the Balkans, for certain, in the Middle East as well, in parts of the Western Europe. And actually, talking about the historical or religious personalities, it's always very hard to decide or find actually where is the limit between a myth, belief, and historical events. And there are a lot of historical figures which lives and deeds are quite reimagined and placed within different traditions and collective memories of various people, various cults. And a lot of it is written in books, in epitaphs, in scriptures, toponyms, legends, and so far and so on. Such a figure actually is St. George. He is usually acknowledged as a true historical figure and is shrouded in religious ambiguity. He is widely celebrated in the whole Christian world. Orthodox, Catholics, Anglican churches, also Syrian Malabar churches, Ethiopian church as well. And celebrated the different dates. Usually he is related to the springtime and spring festivals, celebrated based on the Julian calendar on April 23rd, mostly in Western Catholic churches. And on May 6th, according to the Gregorian calendar, in most Orthodox churches. But this figure is also quite respected by Muslims and in a Socratic way interconnected with the Al-Qidir or Hizir, which was written in Quran and as a prophet or an angel, not named by his name, but mostly acknowledged by his deeds and legacies. Usually he is referred as one who is helping people in need, and also has a quite military background. So we have in Turkey a very famous springtime festival, Hidroles, which is celebrated on the 5th of May and 6th of May, and is also renowned in the Balkans, and these religious practices are also practiced in the Balkans widely. Is it a Christian origin transferred to the Turkey, or in contact with Greeks, or maybe vice versa? We don't know. But actually, I want to, for those who are not quite religious and don't know about the historical background of the personality of St. George, usually the hagiography and the history as well mention that he was born in the 3rd century during the reign of Emperor Aurelian, somewhere in Cappadocia, nowadays Turkey actually. And he was a high-ranked military officer, usually different sources like cons, which is a personal guard of Diocletian, Emperor Diocletian, and even tribune. That proves that he was very highly ranked. So at that point, when I was appointed writing an article about St. George, like a popular one, I started working because I already did ethnographic research on the customary practices related to St. George, which is actually my family patron saint. And I did a comparative research in Bulgaria, Serbia, North Macedonia, and Greece as well. And I saw very much similarities, and which is why I wanted to know more about the historical background, because he is a historical figure, shrouded in mystery, and I started digging the period, who were the military persons, who were the emperors, and so on and so on. So I found interesting things here. So he was martyred, killed by Diocletian by proclaiming the Christian faith. And after that, since 4th century, he became a very established cult, Christian cult, with very wide veneration around all the Middle East, Eastern Empire first, and then in 13th century, 12th, 13th century, Crusader brought it to the legacy of St. George to the western part of Europe. where he was popularized. So actually here is the background story on which is a part of his historiography. And Bollandist, which was famous Jesuit historian approach in researching religious history, actually wrote the first detailed hagiography, placing him that he was decapitated in 23rd of April, near Easter, and mentioned the Diocletian and Maximian, the rule of tetrarchy. This is a famous period of tetrarchic rule where there was a clear division between the East and West, and you will have one emperor, Augustus, also the divine person, and one Caesar in each part, totally administrative, responsible for its part of the empire. Actually, the first written hagiography is related mostly to the martyrdom, so the tortures, sainthood, and so on. And the story about the dragon actually came quite later, and the first written stories can be found in Georgian texts actually, from the 11th century. And you can see here, I show where exactly he became patron saint in many regions, towns, churches, professions, as well families, in all parts of the world, even Ethiopia, even Northern Africa, Egypt, also in Syria, and so on and so on. Actually, his he's buried in Lida. Actually, his bones were moved to Lida in 4th century, and a lot of early shrines appear from the 6th century with the progressive establishment of the church within the Roman Empire. In the Balkans, lots of churches dedicated to St. George appear from 9th and 10th century, very early. I first wanted to see what because I already researched the ritual practices surrounding. It's proclaimed that he's at the first place the military saint, and he was the patron of the Crusader, the Teutonic Knights, also Order of St. George, the Hungarian Chivalric Order, Order of the Garter. Also, he is a protector of Serbian, Romanian, and Bulgarian military. And also later on, organizations like humanitarian organizations like Boy Scouts and Red Cross also took him as a patron saint. He is also listed as one of the 14 holy helpers, which he has a direct role in curing various illnesses. He was particularly proclaimed to heal diseases related to the skin diseases, also insanity. In a lot in particular, because this is the first central place of his cult establishment. Also in the Balkans, and it's very closely related to the springtime, and he appears particularly as a patron of shepherds, which is interconnected also with the pagan practices, in particular with the ancient Roman cult of Pales, which is divinity, shepherd divinity, and interconnected to the spring festivals in the Roman Empire. And why this is important, I will share it later. And in Lida, I found this is academic reference that farmers believe that St. George embodies Alkidia, the green one, making religious vows by ritually slaughtering sheep, ram, or a male lamb, the worst offspring for that came in the early spring. And it is done in the Al-Qadir church, Christian church, which in one period also represented the mosque. So this practice is shared by Muslims and Christians as well. And it has some kind of healing power. So children are invoked there, they put the blood of the sheep on their faces, like a protective thing. And also we have similar practice, which is listed as our intangible heritage in the eastern Serbia on the Balkan mountain. There is one small village where we have a ritual ritual kurban practice, which is a kurban, ritual slaughtering of the lamb. which is shared tradition in Bulgaria, Serbia, and so on. So there are lots of similarities, and also very closely related to the St. George cult. In iconography and the representation of St. George, there are different practices. In Eastern tradition, you have him represented as a Roman soldier, killing the first snake and then the dragon with the wings. And in the western part of Europe, you have him as a crusader, because at that point of time, that was the clothes that most of the soldiers wore. And it became part of the Renaissance and Romanticism, including this magical stores. And it became eventually this knightly image also is originating from the Legenda Aurea, which is brought by Crusader bishop, I think. And the story was so popular that it became a role model for the heroic image in general in literature, and that's why I played the Sleeping Beauty, which is a typical representation. But these are early different representations of the St. George on old medieval and also from different parts of Europe, some of which, one of the oldest representation of St. George killing the snake appears in a snake church in Cappadocia, nowadays Turkey, and he appears jointly with St. Theodore. And the whole cult, or actually the representation of St. George at the first place was him killing the male figure. And later it was taken from the St. Theodore's cult, the same representation with the snake. You will see on iconography, usually St. Theodore rides the red horse and St. George the white one. And in the same church, next to them, you will see St. Helena and Constantine. This is the origin for the iconography. This is old Roman and Middle East cult of Thracian horsemen, and in this area near Danube, it's called, the same cult was called the Nubian horsemen. And it was Asian divinity, usually the patron of the military troops in the Danube and the Balkan area. Against they had their own, and usually it's appearing a lot on those votive reliefs of the military people. Around 90% of the all reliefs with this representation appeared within the Balkans and the Danube, nowhere else. And the Glikon, this is the cult which was recently found in Romania. It's one very short-lasting cult where the snake is the main positive. And it was usually used in the representation lately as Christianity like a villain figure for representation. This with the pig and the lion catching is part of the representation of the same cult, which is why there is a horse leg as well. It's very large in dimension. It's found in Serbia, in Felix Romuliana. It's our UNESCO site. It's Asian. It's a Roman palace from 3rd century, end of the 3rd century and the beginning of the 1st. You will see the similarities in representation of Saint Michael, Archangel Michael, and St. George, and here it's black, and this is from Pechovi. So I had a really provocative thought and tried to link the St. George Christian cult with the pagan cults at the same time that appeared, and I found that the only way who can be represented as divine was actually the emperors and Caesars. And the emperors took their own specific, like not divus of the divine god, like Roman gods taken from the Greek gods, but they had a special hero god figure, and mostly you had to be an exceptional military commander to acquire this, and in the Tetrarchy there was no, the throne was not inherited by, legacy of father, but your legacy as a warrior. And actually, one of the main points which I find by reading a lot of archaeological findings and lots of historic books on the Roman period, I found a lot of similarities between the cult, pagan cult of Emperor Galerius and his representations in the divine, because during the Tetrarchy, the last persecution of Christians actually happened at the time. And Constantine actually formally proclaimed Christianity. This is what we learned, and he was born in Niš, of course. And Galerius actually, 2 years before him, proclaimed Christianity as officially allowed religion. And Constantine built on that and bring them back their possessions. So here on this picture you will have the Thessaloniki rotunda of Galerius, his wannabe mausoleum interconnected with his previous palace at one point, and the triumphal arch, which was dedicated to his victory of the Persian Sassanid Empire, which was at the time the most celebrated victory of the Romans in the whole 4th century. And now it is St. George Church. And on the left you will have, of course, Rosica will know, of course, in Sofia, also Rotunda and also St. George Church, previous Galerius Palace and his temple. And in Romuliana you also have similar things, in Syria and so on, all the domains where Emperor Galerius ruled, and he ruled in the Pontus and Cappadocia as well. So he was the main figure, the main military hero at that point. Moving on. More recently, I want to show that actually St. George appears at the patron saint mostly in the royal circles. In England, Austria, you will see all these families of the Portugal, Bourbon, Italy, Romanov in Russia, Bulgarian Empire, and the Asen. Of course, Serbian dynasty, Nemanjić is the founder of the Serbian medieval dynasty. We had some previous ones, but this is the most celebrated. And actually, the legitimacy of the royalty was connected to the religious proclamation that some saints provided his legitimacy by saving him from the cave. He was imprisoned by his brothers, and so he built a church, one of the oldest medieval church, and the keeper was Stefan Nemanja himself, Đurđevi stupovi, or the pillars of the St. George, built in 12th century. And there are many, many cases of building his legacy. So within the Balkans, you will have almost every town and every village having St. George Church. So you can imagine how the distribution of the cults was big. There was also special chivalric orders dedicated him like a patron saint, particularly established fighting the Ottomans. First, it was the Order of St. George, established of Hungarian King Charles I before the Kosovo battle in 1326, and it was fashioned like usual chivalric orders of the Crusaders. And the lords of kings from this area were members of this first chivalric order. Then it became the Order of the Dragon, also Sigismund of Luxembourg, and the whole emperor, Roman emperor. And all this, after the fall of Constantinople, vanished a little bit in the West or Central Europe, but they remain very strong in activity within Romania, Serbia, and Hungary. And Serbian despot Stefan Lazarević was listed the first among the nobility. It was mostly reserved for the kings and nobility, and he was the master knight of this order. And then later in Austria, also the military order St. George under the Emperor Frederick III was designed for fighting the Ottomans against establishing the military border as a protection of Styria, Carinthia, and Carniola. So there are also some links to the Austria as well. Now we will move, if I have time, to the dragon. Yeah, the main plot was designed like a fairy tale story. There is no real connections to the history with that in the 13th century, and the main plot is like there is a dragon in the lake. He asks tribute in sheep. When the sheep doesn't, the people don't have more sheep, they demands for the virgins or children, and when the king's daughter was to be sacrificed, then the St. George appears, saved the day, and all the people convert to Christianity. And that's about it. It's more a romantic story and hero design. And also I have idea how the dragon story appeared, because in Serbia and in Persia there is a villain with one head of Arjidaka. Is from the Zoroastrian Avesta, and it is Arjidaka. In semiology you will see the similarity, because in Serbia the St. George is fighting Ajdaha. I don't know the pronunciation, but it's the same. And it is the evil counterpart with the snakes on his shoulders, eating sheep and then human brains and so on. And here's something localized I want to share with you. In Serbia, near Kruševac, you have a dragon-shaped artificial lake. And of course, it takes human existence every year. So we have lots of legends in relation to that, of course with the St. George and the church related to that and so on. And several other places in Serbia we have also famous legends, also Golubac fortress, where we have Golubačka mušica, which is a flea, very poisonous flea, and it is also interconnected as from the dragon's mouth. When it was killed, they flew and killed all the cattle in the area. That is the legend. And such legends you have all around the world, of course. Everybody claims that he killed the dragon exactly in his village. And these are some representation I want to show. This is our famous, one of the most richest people in Vojvodina. And this is this patron saint and his son's faces and daughters represented by famous painter in the 19th century. Of course, royal family Karađorđević also has on his mausoleum the picture where he is represented as St. George. The same pattern was taken all around the world, just like a memory of your families retaining in these images. And that would be all. So you can figure how this practice is transforming, connecting, interconnecting, changing. And who wants to know how I connected with Galerius can read my article and Hyperboreal Historical Journal. Thank you.